Hello, this is Rachel with the Otago Prattville Public Library, and I'm here today to show you all how to make vegan calzones. This recipe comes from the Thug Kitchen cookbook. Thug Kitchen Party Grub is the title of the cookbook. I believe it's their second one, and it's an excellent cookbook full of really great vegan and vegetarian recipes and all sorts of recipes, really. But they do use very grown-up language, and so I decided to show you guys a little bit about how to cook and what substitutions to use and things like that for a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. And I wanted to use one of their excellent recipes and kind of PG-ify it for you. So this recipe comes in 3 parts. We need to make the dough for the calzone, the filling, and the sauce for dipping it in. We're starting with the dough, starting with 4 cups of all-purpose flour. And we're starting with the dough because we're going to need to let it rise for a while, about an hour and a half. So that gives us time to prepare the dough, knead it out, all that good stuff, and then we can go make the sauce. About 30 minutes before the pizza dough is finished, we'll go ahead and start making the filling. And then by the time we're done making the filling, we're ready to stuff all of our goodies into our calzone and start baking. So 4 cups of all-purpose flour, and we are going to whisk the flour and salt together in a large bowl. It's going to be half a teaspoon of salt. And you'll see me cleaning up as I go along, and that's just because it's easier for me to keep track of everything that way. I will also be referring to the recipe as I do not have this recipe memorized. I wrote it out for myself for this purpose because the cookbook I have is actually on Kindle. So in went the half a teaspoon of salt, and now we're going to whisk them together. After we're finished with that, we're going to mix 1 3/4 cups of warm water, 2 1/4 teaspoon of active dry yeast, and a half teaspoon of sugar. And we're going to combine those in a cup or measuring cup or a small bowl or whatever, and let it get foamy for, usually takes just a couple minutes. I gave it about 2.5 to 3 minutes to let it go. So this activates the yeast and gets it ready to go, and we're going to add that yeast mixture to the flour afterwards, stirring it into a shaggy dough. And when we're making the dough, we can add up to 1/4 cup of water to the dough, 1 tablespoon at a time as needed, just to get the right consistency. So while I'm getting our yeast prepped, another note I want to mention is if you combine the warm water, the active dry yeast, and the sugar, and you leave it for about 3 minutes to 2.5 minutes, somewhere around there, and you don't see a kind of foamy top start to happen on the surface of the water, then your yeast is no longer active, it's no longer alive, and it's not going to create the rise you want for your dough. So you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that you have live yeast for this so that you get the right consistency of your dough. All right, so as you can see now, our yeast is nice and kind of bubbly and foamy at the top. So we're going to go ahead and pour that liquid mixture with the yeast right in with the flour and salt that we whisked together earlier. And I'm just putting that 1/4 cup of additional water in the same bowl with the yeast and whatnot. So if I do end up incorporating extra water into the dough, it'll catch those leftover bits that were stuck in the bowl. So I'm setting that aside for now and beginning to knead. This is an excellent point to remind you all that I washed my hands before this, and that you should wash your hands frequently when cooking. 20 seconds or more, probably more if you're cooking especially. This was prepared just for me, but even it doesn't matter who you're cooking for, you want to maintain good hygiene, and it would be a shame to have to break your stay-at-home streak because you get food poisoning or something like that. So be sure to stay clean and use good hygiene when you are cooking. So here we are folding in the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients of the dough, and we're just trying to kind of get it all incorporated until it's in a shaggy ball. Once the shaggy ball of dough is the right consistency, like I said, adding water if you need it, or depending on lots of things. It could depend on the weather, it could depend on your elevation, the elevation that you're cooking at, all sorts of things like that. But as soon as I get all of this dough off my fingers and into a shaggy dough ball, I'm going to put it out on the countertop that I lightly dust with flour and knead it for a few minutes. And on to the fun part. I've sprinkled my work surface with flour and I'm going to begin kneading. The recipe says just to knead for a few minutes until in a smooth ball, and the cookbook has a method in it to describe the way to knead properly. I am not an expert, so I'm not going to try and explain it here. I think I'm doing it mostly right, but basically you just want to start building up the gluten structure in the dough so that it holds together and gets nice and stretchy and yummy for when we go to bake it. So I'm going to knead for a few minutes. All right, so once you're happy with the consistency of the dough and you've got it in a smooth ball, you're going to set aside or measure out 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and we're going to get a large bowl, and after rubbing the olive oil onto the dough ball, we're going to put it in the bowl and cover with a towel, a clean towel of course, and then let it go ahead and double in size. And like I said, that the doubling, the rising, will take about an hour and a half. So the ingredients for our sauce are 5 cloves of garlic, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 1½ teaspoons dry thyme, 1½ teaspoons dry oregano, a pinch of red pepper flakes, 2 cans of whole tomatoes, and a pinch of salt. And the sauce really couldn't be any easier. You're going to take all of those ingredients that I just mentioned, throw them in your blender, and blend until smooth. So now that we have prepared our sauce and our dough is rising, we are going to start preparing our filling. I have preheated the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm currently warming olive oil in a large skillet over medium heat. Our ingredients for the filling are 2 teaspoons of olive oil, 8 ounces of tempeh, 1 yellow onion chopped, 1 tablespoon of soy sauce, 2 teaspoons chopped fennel seeds. I omitted these because I did not have them. 1 teaspoon dried basil, 1 teaspoon dried oregano, 1 teaspoon dried thyme, 6 cups of spinach, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and 3 cloves of garlic minced. Additionally, we'll be making a ricotta blend for the filling. It's a fake ricotta, obviously, since we're going vegan, and it is comprised of 1/3 of a cup of sliced almonds that have been toasted, 14 ounces extra firm tofu, drained, 2 cloves of garlic, minced, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, a half a teaspoon of salt, and 1/3 of a cup of nutritional yeast. Okay, so now we're going to add our soy sauce and fennel, basil, oregano, and thyme. And we're adding these seasonings and stirring for about 30 seconds just to get all the flavors nice and incorporated together. And then after we get that stirred in and everything is hanging out real nice, we're going to fold in the spinach, lemon juice, and garlic. And I did go ahead and put the lemon juice and the garlic on top of the spinach. So when you just see me dump in the spinach, that's why I already added the lemon juice and the garlic. And once you add the spinach, we want to let it wilt, so we can add up to 3 tablespoons of water as needed, and we can cook for about 2 or 3 minutes before adding red pepper flakes as kind of the finishing touch to the tempeh and spinach part. So I'm adding my spinach in carefully because it's a lot bigger before it wilts. I used a little bit less than 6 cups of spinach. 6 cups was recommended. However, some of my spinach was no longer good. One of my packages was no good by the time I got around to cooking the recipe. So I went ahead and just used the good spinach, obviously. And we're going to go ahead and fold that in so that the heat can evenly get to and wilt all of the spinach leaves. Okay, so the spinach is wilted. I removed it from the heat, and there is the spinach and tempeh part of the filling. So for the second half of the filling, we're going to make a vegan ricotta, and we're going to put the toasted almonds, the tofu, extra firm tofu, garlic and olive oil, lemon juice and salt, and nutritional yeast all in a blender, and we're going to blend it up. To toast the almonds, you can do a stovetop method or an oven method. I like the stovetop method personally because you can keep an eye on it a little easier. And I did almost run into what the cookbook warns you of, which is that you can, if you step away or get distracted, absolutely lose track and burn your almonds. My almonds did not burn. They got beautifully toasted, but it was more or less by luck that I found out in time. So I've added my tofu in, and I'm putting in my garlic. For the ricotta, we're using 2 cloves of minced garlic. We're going to add in our olive oil and lemon juice and salt. And again, the nutritional yeast was 1/3 cup. Now, I found that when I blended this up the first time, it was really, really thick and it had a hard time blending, in fact. So I tried smushing it down. I tried all sorts of things, shaking it around, trying to get the mixture to fully incorporate and become smooth and kind of silky like an actual ricotta. And what I ended up doing in the end was adding a splash of almond milk. That didn't do anything to the flavor. Obviously, we're using almonds anyway. All it did was water down the consistency just a teeny bit, to where it really had that nice ricotta texture, and it was less pasty and chunky that way. So I did take 2 tries at going ahead and blending it. So I would recommend, if you run into the same issue where your fake ricotta is too thick, go ahead and add about 1/3 cup to 1/2 cup of almond milk, and that will take care of the problem for you, so that when you go to blend it up, it blends smoothly and beautifully and everything goes together perfectly. Okay, so our dough has been rising for 1.5 hours. That means it's ready to go. Our tomato sauce has been whipped up and blended, and we have also made our filling with the tempeh, spinach, and almond ricotta. And we are ready to assemble our calzones. So I'm just prepping my workspace with some flour on the surface to go ahead and allow the dough to not stick to the counter. It will hopefully just kind of move around a little bit more easily that way. And I'm punching the extra air out and doing just a couple of kneads to get out any big air bubbles that may be hanging out in the dough. So I'm going to knead the dough a couple of times and get it back into a ball, and then I'm going to cut it into 8 equal pieces. So this recipe makes 8 hand calzones. It sounds like that's a lot of calzones, and then you make them and you're like, oh, they're kind of small and cute. But then you eat them and you're like, no, that's a lot of calzones. But they are delicious, so I have no regrets about making the full recipe. So I'm cutting my dough into 8 equal pieces, and then we're going to roll each piece out to about 1/4 inch thickness using a rolling pin. And as you will see from watching me, it took me a minute to learn that lesson and go ahead and use a rolling pin. I tried to smush it out with my hands first, and that just took far too long. And then for each nice dough circle that we have that's been rolled out to 1/4 inch of thickness, we're going to spoon about 2 tablespoons of the tempeh spinach mixture and about 1/3 cup of the ricotta mixture on one side of the circle. We're going to wet the edge of the dough slightly all the way around, fold it over and crimp the edges with a fork if you want to be fancy, or if you're like me, just crimp them with your fingers and kind of fold the edges up into a little bit of a crimped pattern so that it seals in the fillings. And then, of course, you'll do the same thing 7 more times so that you get all 8 calzones. So as you can see, I've sped up the process for you a little bit, so you aren't seeing all of the labor that goes into it in real time, which would be quite boring. But once I've got my 8 pieces of dough rolled out, filled and folded over, we're going to go ahead and put them on a prepared baking pan that should have foil or parchment paper on it and a little bit of cooking spray. Then we're gonna put our calzones on the prepared pan and cut 2 to 3 vents on top of each calzone so that the steam can get released during the baking. And then we're going to spray the tops of the calzones as well with a little bit of that cooking oil spray and bake them for 15 to 20 minutes or until golden brown. I recommend, I baked them for 15 minutes and then checked on them, and then I did end up going ahead and baking them a little bit longer, but I wish I would have gone the full 20 minutes just because the bottoms of the calzone, while the tops were nice and browned and delicious looking, the bottoms were still a little pale. So I like my calzones a little bit more golden all around. So you can really take a look, use a spatula to lift up and look at the bottom and make sure that the whole surface of the dough is looking golden and delicious. And as I mentioned before, if you didn't make the tomato sauce to dip your calzones in yet, please feel free to make that now while the calzones are baking. Otherwise, like I said, bake for 15 to 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer if you like them a little bit more crispy. And that is the gist of the recipe. You'll take them out, turn your oven off, let them cool, and serve with the warm sauce. I hope you guys enjoy. If you do decide to make this recipe, I hope you let me know how it goes. And are there any other recipes or special diets that you'd like to see me take a look at and experiment with on our channel or on our Facebook? Let me know in the comments. Feel free to give me an email as well. And thank you guys again so much for watching. Bon appetit!